Anyone who has spent time in the high alpine knows the old adage the summit is only the halfway point. The most treacherous part of the journey truly begins the moment you turn your back on the peak to descend. At this very moment, entombed beneath countless tons of glacial ice and compacted snow in Alaska, deep inside a hidden crevasse on the imposing Mendenhall Towers, rest the remains of two absolute titans of the sport, the seasoned veteran Ryan Johnson and the visionary phenomenon Marc-André Leclerc. They had just successfully executed a climb that defied logic, pulling off an impossible ascent, but the mountain decided to claim them right at the pinnacle of their glory. It left the rescue teams with absolutely zero chance of recovery. How does a climb executed with such perfection dissolve into a fatal, suffocating silence? To understand the tragedy, we have to understand the man. Why did this solitary genius spend his entire existence running away from the horizontal world to live in the vertical? You have to imagine a human mind that operates like a kicked beehive. It was a place of constant noise, chaotic static, and relentless flashes of thought that simply refused to be tamed. That was the internal reality Marc-André Leclerc wrestled with every single day of his life. Born in 1992 on Vancouver Island, he never felt at home in his own skin. From his earliest memories, he felt like a stranger, trapped in his body. Doctors slapped a label on it: attention deficit disorder. But Mark had his own name for the condition. He called it having a squirrel brain. He was fundamentally incapable of sitting still or conforming. For a kid like him, the four walls of a traditional classroom didn't just feel restrictive. They felt like solitary confinement cells designed to break his spirit. The school system demanded rigid discipline and absolute silence, but all it achieved was pushing him further to the fringes, leaving him with a crushing sense of isolation. While his peers were studying textbooks, he was desperately searching for an escape route from the labyrinth of his own hyperactive mind. The pivotal moment that changed his trajectory forever happened when he was 8 years old. His grandfather gifted him a book titled Quest for Adventure, a gripping collection of stories about legendary expeditions and survival against the odds. When Mark cracked open those pages, he didn't just see words, he saw a map to an entirely different universe. It was a world where people lived on the razor's edge, embraced lethal risks, and triumphed over the impossible. That book became the catalyst for his entire future. He realized that the limits of what is possible exist solely to be shattered. At the age of 9, he walked through the doors of a climbing gym called Project Climbing for the very first time. He approached a towering artificial wall, wrapped his fingers around the plastic holds, and hauled his body off the ground. And in that split second, a miracle occurred. The relentless static in his head vanished. The squirrel brain finally went still. For the first time in his life, he experienced an absolute ringing silence. The vertical world instantly provided the mental clarity and laser focus he had been chasing his entire life. From that point forward, climbing was not merely a sport or a form of exercise. It became a necessity, the only way he could truly exist, and the only mechanism he had to manage the chaos of reality. By the time he turned 15, the artificial walls of the gym felt like a cage. Marc-André took his talents to the wild mountains around Agassiz. What he began doing out there on the real rock made the seasoned pros shake their heads in total disbelief. His gear setup looked less like professional equipment and more like something scavenged from a museum. He used fuzzy old ropes, sketchy carabiners, and worn-out shoes that had seen better days. He was climbing in high-consequence zones where a single equipment failure meant a guaranteed fatal fall, but soon he abandoned even that ghostly safety net. Mark graduated to free soloing climbing without any ropes or protection. Now there was absolutely nothing between him and the ground but empty air. In 2013, he moved to Squamish. This place is the true mecca for Canadian rockhounds, where massive granite monoliths shoot up from the ancient forest floor like stone gods. Mark didn't just join the scene, he immediately raised the stakes to a level that terrified people. He pulled off the first free ascent of a notorious route known as the Temptation of St. Anthony. We are talking about a difficulty grade of 513 A-elite territory that remains a pipe dream for 99% of climbers. The local climbing community watched him with a complicated mix of reverence and horror. Here was this kid with the shaggy hair and the goofy smile, completely ignoring every conventional safety measure in the book. He threw away the stopwatch and refused to play the game of chasing speed records or sponsorships. For him, the accolades were noise. Only the purity of the process mattered. While others chased fame and magazine covers, Mark was searching for a pure, unfiltered connection with the stone. He became a ghost of the cliffs, incredibly talented, but terrifyingly casual about death. 700 meters of gray granite loom over the highway, casting a permanent shadow over the town. This is the Stowamish Chief, the stone idol of Squamish, a wall that most climbers approach with sweaty palms and reverent awe. But in 2013, Marc-André Leclerc saw it differently. He didn't see a terrifying obstacle. He saw a playground for a psychologically insane experiment. A plan crystallized in his mind, one that seemed physically impossible to complete in a single calendar day. He was going to free solo 3 of the Chief's most punishing walls back to back: the Grand Wall, Uncle Ben's, and the University Wall. Mark walks to the base of the Grand Wall. A typical rope team spends an entire day battling just this one route weighed down with kilograms of metal cams, ropes, and protection gear. Leclerc arrived carrying nothing but his climbing shoes and a small bag of chalk clipped to his waist. No rope, no harness, nothing else. He touches the cold rock and begins to flow upward. Picture this moment vividly: a man hanging by his fingertips 300 meters in the air. Below his feet is absolute emptiness, the whistling wind and treetops that look like patches of moss. One wrong move, one slippery crystal of granite, one sudden muscle cramp, and gravity would instantly step in to end his story. There is no partner to save him. The safety rope simply does not exist. But if you look at Mark's face, he doesn't look scared. His movements are smooth and fluid, as if he is dancing on the vertical plane. And in this high-stakes environment, a strange metamorphosis occurs. That same squirrel brain that tormented him in the classroom transforms into his ultimate superpower. The chaos of intrusive thoughts evaporates, leaving behind a diamond-hard, crystal-clear focus. He completely dissolves into the act of movement. Mark flies up. The Grand Wall runs back down the descent trail and immediately starts on the next route. He crushes Uncle Ben's, then moves to the University Wall. It is a true vertical marathon. His fingertips are shredded raw on the coarse granite crystals. His muscles are burning with lactic acid, screaming for rest, but he keeps climbing. Other climbers hanging at belay stations watch him drift past with stunned expressions, unable to comprehend what they are seeing. A lone figure zips past them, breaking every rule of common sense and safety without a care in the world. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, Leclerc completes the link-up. He stands on the summit chest, heaving, breathing heavily as he looks out at the horizon. He has just executed what was considered impossible, and he did it in a style that offered absolutely no second chances. This day becomes a watershed moment in his career. He instantly transforms from a talented vagabond climber into an elite-level figure in the alpinism world. The community realizes this isn't just some reckless daredevil with a death wish. This is a man with a phenomenal mind, capable of suppressing primal fear in situations where others would be paralyzed by terror. Leclerc had proven to himself that his path was a solitary one. He descends with total confidence, knowing he is ready for the true giants. He is ready for the big mountains. The wind in these high places is so powerful it can rip a grown man off a wall like a dry leaf torn from a branch. In 2015, Marc-André Leclerc leaves the comfortable, grippy granite of Squamish and travels to the edge of the world Patagonia. This isn't a training ground anymore. This is a gladiator arena where simple mistakes are paid for with your life. Before him rises Cerro Torre, a legendary stone needle, crowned with a cap of unstable rime ice that for decades was considered impossible to climb. Mark chooses a route with a telling name, the Corkscrew. The line spirals around the granite tower, forcing the climber to traverse different faces of the mountain, exposing them to the full brutality of the winds of the southern hemisphere. It involves 1,200 meters of vertical gain. For anyone else, this would be a multi-day siege expedition with heavy haul bags of gear and a portable ledge to sleep on. Marc-André Leclerc stands at the base of the spire, a solitary speck against the jagged skyline. As he begins his ascent, he does something that defies the logic of every veteran mountaineer watching from below, leaving them utterly baffled. He carries a rope, but it remains coiled and buried deep within his pack, practically useless dead weight. For the vast majority of this climb, he has stripped away all safety nets, refusing to place any protection between himself and the ground. He engages in free soloing, clinging to razor-thin granite edges, using nothing but the raw power of his fingertips and absolute surgical precision. He moves through 99% of the route with the casual ease of someone taking a morning walk. But this is no walk in the park. It is a vertical nightmare, with a void stretching 1 kilometer deep beneath his heels. In Patagonia, the atmosphere is volatile, shifting from calm to chaotic faster than a heartbeat. A pristine blue sky can be devoured by ominous, lead-heavy storm clouds in mere minutes. Leclerc is navigating a zone where solid rock disappears, replaced by the treacherous, surreal formations of rime ice. This is not the solid, predictable ice of a hockey rink. It is a fragile, aerated nightmare, porous and brittle, formed from freezing mist and violent winds. Swinging an ice axe into it feels like trying to find purchase in frozen cotton candy. It offers no guarantees. A single miscalculation, a sudden gust, or a chunk of ice breaking away would send him plummeting into the abyss without recourse. Yet amidst this precarious dance, Marc remains unnervingly calm, his pulse steady as stone. He performs a delicate ballet on the precipice, merging granite and frozen water into one fluid, continuous upward motion. When he finally crests the summit and descends, the shockwave of his solo accomplishment ripples instantly across the internet. The global climbing community is left reeling in disbelief. The corkscrew route had never been soloed before, and certainly not like this. Editors and alpinism experts immediately scramble, desperate to uncover the identity of this phantom climber. Headlines blaze across the industry: the strongest young alpinist on Earth, and the dawn of a new era in solo climbing. Journalists hunt for interviews, and major sponsors line up with checkbooks eager to attach their brand to his name. However, the protagonist of this saga responds to the deafening hype in a way no one expects. Rather than stepping into the spotlight to sign autographs and monetize his fame, he recoils, fading back into the shadows. For Leclerc, this victory was never about public accolades. It was a deeply private, almost spiritual communion with the wild. He has zero interest in being a cover model or chasing the fleeting dopamine of social media validation. He traveled to the end of the world for an honest, unmediated dialogue with the mountain, and having concluded the conversation, he is content. While the climbing world obsesses over his technique, Marc is already dreaming of silence and remote, untouched walls where he can disappear completely. Winter in Patagonia is not merely a seasonal shift, it is a declaration of war by nature. The vast majority of climbers pack up and flee at the first snowflake. Yet in 2016, Marc-André did the unthinkable. He returned to this frozen hellscape specifically to seek out a deeper, more profound isolation. His new objective bordered on absolute lunacy, the first ever winter solo ascent of the formidable Tora Egger. If climbing these spires in summer was a monumental challenge, attempting Tora Egger in winter was widely considered a suicide mission for anyone whose focus wavered for a millisecond. The conditions are alien, with daylight shrinking to a tiny, merciless window. Temperatures plunge so drastically that touching his metal gear feels like grabbing a hot iron, searing his fingers even through thick gloves. Marc launches his first attempt, but the mountain rejects him violently. The route is unclimbable, buried under insurmountable conditions, forcing him to retreat. Now begins the true test of the expedition, the agonizing psychological battle of waiting. Leclerc is stranded alone at base camp. There is not another human soul for miles, only the shrieking wind attempting to shred his nylon tent into ribbons. The days bleed into one another, stretching out endlessly. In this vacuum, solitude transforms into a heavy physical weight, pressing down on the psyche harder than any 80-pound pack ever could. Yet Marc's resolve does not fracture. He sits amidst the snowdrifts, tuning his senses to the rhythm of the storm. Finally, on September 17th, the sky clears just enough to offer a sliver of hope. Marc launches onto a route known as the Winter Link-Up. He moves with ghostly speed, racing against the inevitable return of darkness. He confronts sections of nightmarish, mixed climbing rock, coated in a deceptive veneer of ice, where placing a piton or any safety gear is physically impossible. He is forced to hang suspended over the void, his entire life relying on the tips of his ice axes hooked onto precarious slivers of stone, navigating overhanging mushrooms of ice that groan under his weight, threatening to shatter and collapse. There is absolutely no margin for error. No partner exists to catch a fall or whisper words of courage. Every single motion is a binary choice between survival and death. When he finally hauls himself onto the summit, he is greeted not by applause, but by the hollow, icy silence of the stratosphere. This successful winter ascent of Tora Egger cements his legacy as a visionary. The climbing community finally understands Leclerc visualizes climbable lines where others see only certain death. The experience fundamentally alters him. He realizes he has unlocked the ability to function in a state of total radical autonomy, relying exclusively on his own intuition and grit. Picture yourself standing at the foot of a wall, rising 2.5 kilometers into the sky. This is the emperor face of Mount Robson, arguably the most intimidating vertical wall in the Canadian Rockies. In 2016, Marc-André Leclerc arrives at the base and performs a bizarre ritual. He removes his phone and watch places them in his pack at the bottom and begins to climb. He intentionally strips away his ability to track time or call for rescue. He is now completely off the grid, outside of time, and severed from civilization. His target is the legendary route known as Infinite Patience. The name is a warning. The face is a towering layer cake of loose, brittle limestone bands and treacherous, unpredictable ice. Marc is climbing entirely alone. He has no partner, no radio, and now no concept of how many hours or days he has been battling gravity. This is a deliberate choice. For him, it is essential to cut the umbilical cord to the modern world, ensuring he is truly one-on-one with the raw elements of the mountain. He seeks a pure adventure, an experience untainted by record-keeping or the pressure of the clock. The ascent evolves into a surreal high-altitude dance. Leclerc navigates 2,500 meters of complex terrain in total radio silence. He swings his tools into ice sheets that could easily peel away from the underlying rock at any moment. Every meter gained is a supreme test of his mental fortitude. Without a watch, time becomes fluid. It stretches and collapses. He is no longer calculating his pace or speed. He has dissolved, becoming a functional component of the mountain itself. This represents the apex of his philosophy. For Marc-André, a climb of this magnitude is a spiritual act, a method of erasing his own ego in the face of nature's grandeur. While other elite climbers are obsessed with logistics, nutrition, and split times, he chases a flow state where fear evaporates, leaving only pure, unadulterated presence. He is not attempting to conquer the peak, he is attempting to merge with it. When he finally crests the ridge and begins his descent, the world witnesses a human being who has reached the absolute zenith of technical and mental mastery. He looks physically drained, yet his eyes hold a profound serenity. He has just executed one of the most significant solo ascents in the entire history of alpinism. And yet there is no record of his time. To him, the metrics are irrelevant. He returns from the heights holding answers to questions that simply do not exist in the hustle and noise of city life. He has demonstrated that true mastery requires no audience and no digital proof. It is a triumph of the human spirit locked forever in the silence of those colossal walls. While Marc-André Leclerc is busy dissolving his ego amidst the quiet of the Canadian peaks far to the north, a different story is unfolding. In the rugged, rain-soaked town of Juneau, Alaska, lives a man who understands the local ice formations better than anyone on Earth. Ryan Johnson is 34 years old, and in many ways, he is the gregarious antithesis of the solitary, detached Marc. Ryan Johnson was a force of nature, a man carved from the very bedrock of Alaska. To the outside world, he was a hard-working miner and a builder. The guy running Tongass Fitness who pushed people to be their best. But beneath that blue-collar exterior lay a spirit forged in iron and will, making him a true pillar of the community. In the tight-knit fraternity of Alaskan climbers, he wasn't just another guy on the rope. He was the standard. A mentor who taught you how to survive, a guide who never lost his cool, and a bona fide legend in a land that swallows amateurs whole. Most people have a lawn for a backyard. Ryan had the Mendenhall Towers. But don't let the familiarity fool you. This wasn't a playground. It was a vertical maze of granite and ice, a place where a single misstep converts a fun day out into a funeral. Johnson had devoted a lifetime to dissecting these spires. He memorized every jagged feature and learned to predict the schizophrenic northern weather patterns long before the clouds even gathered on the horizon. He could hear the ice groaning before it snapped, and he spoke the language of the storms barreling in from the Pacific Ocean. His resume in these mountains wasn't just written in ink. It was written in grit, survival, and an obstinate refusal to quit. Flashback to 2008. Ryan and his partner, Sam Magro, pulled off the first ascent of the West Tower. But the mountain didn't let them go easily. They got pinned down by a monstrous storm that turned a triumph into a fight for their lives. Picture this. You are stuffed into a claustrophobic snow cave, shoulders touching for 10 agonizing days. Outside, the wind is screaming like a banshee. Temperatures are plunging and your food bag is looking terrifyingly empty. That is true fear. Most men would hang up their boots after that. Ryan just got tougher. He walked out of that white hell, and by 2011, he was back to settle the score, free climbing the South Buttress direct on the main tower like it was nothing. That climb didn't just put him on the map, it proved he owned the terrain. He didn't just scramble up rock faces, he interpreted them. He read the mountain's subtle cues the way you or I would read a morning newspaper. Yet even the heavy hitters have that one obsession, the white whale that haunts their dreams. For Ryan, it was the north face of the main Mendenhall Tower. A dark, brooding monster that refused to be tamed. We are talking about 760 meters of concave granite that exists in perpetual shadow. The sun essentially abandons this wall. It is a vertical, deep freeze, terrifyingly complex and hostile to human life, but Johnson understood the brutal nature of the local ice better than anyone. The ice there is a nightmare, paper-thin, unpredictable, and fleeting. It only forms during tiny, perfect meteorological windows. Ryan kept coming back, staring up at the wall, mentally tracing lines and looking for a weakness in its armor. For him, this wasn't about ego or trophies anymore. It was a decade-long conversation between a man and the wild Alaskan frontier. It was personal, a haunting riddle he was determined to solve. Sure, Ryan was a doting dad, a rock-solid friend, and a beast of an athlete. But let's be honest, a chunk of his soul was already up there, frozen to that granite face, waiting for him to come claim it. He had the vision, but he needed the engine. He needed a partner with the raw speed and technical wizardry to make the impossible possible. And unknowingly, destiny was already pulling the strings, drawing a young prodigy into Ryan's orbit for a collision course with history. The wall curves inward like a massive granite satellite dish, but instead of signals, it catches nothing but darkness and bone-chilling cold, looming menacingly over the glacier below. The north face of the main Mendenhall Tower stood as the last great unsolved mystery of the range. It was the prize everyone wanted, but no one could touch. For years it remained an impregnable fortress, swatting away climbers like flies. The surface isn't good ice. It is coated in a nasty thin veneer of verglas and feather-light hoarfrost. You can't just swing an axe into this stuff and expect it to stick. It is a deceptive glaze barely clinging to the rock, held together by freezing temperatures and sheer luck. Ryan knew exactly how treacherous it was. In 2015, he stood right there at the bottom jaw set, determined to finally conquer the beast. But the mountain had other plans. As soon as he started, the ice shattered like glass, and the rock refused to hold his safety gear. He had to back off to survive. But failing didn't break his spirit. It just gave him clarity. That retreat taught him a valuable lesson. Brute strength wasn't the answer here. To unlock this puzzle, you needed a virtuoso, someone who could flow over rock and ice with surgical precision. It required a climber who could dance on crampons, hooking the monopoints of their tools on rock edges smaller than a dime. He needed a mutant, someone who felt as at home on that deadly terrain as a shark feels in the ocean. Meanwhile, the universe was aligning the stars for Marc-André Leclerc. Fate was shuffling the deck, preparing to deal a hand that would change everything. Marc-André's plans for an expedition to Mount Waddington had just imploded, leaving him with a wide-open schedule and a hunger for a real challenge. The seasoned local veteran and the young technical genius were on a collision course. When they finally linked up, it was like striking a match in a room full of gasoline. The chemistry was instant. Ryan brought the master-level logistics and the deep intrinsic knowledge of the range. He knew how to navigate the approach where the weather would try to kill them, and how to read the subtle shifts in the Alaskan sky that signaled impending doom. Marc-André brought the X-factor, an uncanny ability to find a path where everyone else saw a dead end. They were cut from the same cloth, both despising the heavy, slow siege style of climbing, involving endless ropes and haul bags. They opted for pure alpine style. Fast and light sounds romantic, but in practice it is terrifying. It means you are voluntarily tossing your safety net out the window to move efficiently. They stripped their gear down to the bare essentials to maximize velocity. It is a high-wire act without a harness. The faster you move, the less time you spend in the danger zone, but if you slip, there are no second chances. Together, Leclerc and Johnson looked like the perfect key for the lock of the North Face. Johnson carried the map of this vertical labyrinth in his mind, knowing every twist and turn. Leclerc possessed the otherworldly skill to physically traverse those walls. Standing there gazing up at that concave granite monster, they knew they finally had the complete package. The mountain, which had stood undefeated and arrogant for so long, had finally met its match. This blend of veteran wisdom and youthful audacity was about to turn a pipe dream into a concrete plan of attack. March 4th, 2018. The rhythmic chopping of helicopter blades tore through the frigid, still air, signaling the start of the endgame. As the bird lifted off the glacier and banked back toward civilization, it left behind a crushing silence. Suddenly they were just two insignificant specks in a vast, indifferent white ocean. Marc-André and Ryan stood at the foot of their obsession. The sky overhead was a piercing electric blue, a color so intense it felt alien for these northern latitudes. The weather report promised a miracle, several days of high pressure and stability. It was the kind of golden ticket that rarely gets printed in Alaska, and they knew they couldn't waste a second. They began gearing up with the quiet, grim efficiency of soldiers going into battle. The first step was shedding every ounce of dead weight. The skis, which would have been their getaway car for a fast descent, were abandoned. Dragging skis up a sheer wall is impossible, so they planted an avalanche probe deep into the snow and draped a high-visibility orange vest over it. That splash of neon was their lighthouse, the only familiar coordinate in a frozen sea that they planned to return to. Now, if you looked inside their backpacks, you might start to panic. What they carried, or rather what they didn't, would terrify any sane mountaineer. Their packs were shockingly light. Food was kept to a starvation minimum, just enough calories to keep the engine running while moving. A tiny stove to melt snow was their only luxury. The hardware was frighteningly specific ice screws that had been sawed off short because the ice on the face was too thin to accept standard gear. They packed Spectre's wicked, hook-like anchors designed to claw into frozen moss and hairline cracks when there is nothing else to hold you. But the most alarming part was the gear they chose to leave behind. No sleeping bags, no tent. They were deliberately stripping away their ability to camp. This was a single push strategy driven by a logic as brutal as it is simple. Weight is the enemy of speed, and on a wall, this hostile being slow is a death sentence. By ditching the overnight gear, they burned their bridges. They had removed the option to stop. It was up or nothing. Survival out here is a ruthless game of thermodynamics. They must remain in perpetual motion just to stoke the fires of their own body heat. If the slightest variable shifts, a sudden squall, a misplaced step, or a physical injury, they will be left exposed with absolutely no shelter to wait out the freezing onslaught. They are effectively stripping away their armor, marching toward the towering face, with little more than the clothes on their backs to shield them from the merciless elements. As the climbers step up to the base of the route, they are making themselves terrifyingly vulnerable, the metallic snap of a carabiner locking shut, and the dull thud of steel biting into frozen water signal the point of no return. By abandoning their skis and leaving their heavy sleeping bags behind at the base, they haven't just lightened their load. They have burned the only bridge leading back to safety. Retreat is no longer an option. The only escape route from this frozen prison lies across the very summit itself. The mountain face confronts them aggressively, offering no warm-up, and up close, the topography reveals itself to be far more labyrinthine and treacherous than it appeared through the safety of their binoculars. The granite walls are plastered with sheets of ice that require the focus and dexterity of a neurosurgeon to navigate. Every single pull against gravity is a permanent expenditure of their dwindling energy reserves, a withdrawal that cannot be refunded. As the pair melts into the imposing shadow of the north face, they initiate the final deadly act of their journey, where the wager is nothing less than their own existence. Picture swinging an ice tool not into brittle, shattering glass, but into something that feels like dense, frozen styrofoam. The metal beak sinks in with a satisfying, muffled thunk, locking into the porous surface with a reassuring grip that every climber dreams of. It is this bizarre, aerated ice that Marc-André and Ryan are ascending as they crush the final vertical meters of the wall on March 5th, 2026. They are practically sprinting toward the sky, suspended over a terrifying 700-meter void that drops away into the abyss below their boots. The clock reads 10:26 in the morning. Suddenly, the profound, ancient silence of the high peaks is shattered, not by the howling wind, but by a distinctively modern anomaly, the chirp of a cell phone picking up a signal. Against all odds, they have snagged a fragile, invisible thread of connectivity, momentarily tethering them back to the living world, far below the clouds. Mark reaches into his pocket and retrieves his device. His fingers, which have been locked in a death grip around ice tools for hours, now struggle to type out the most significant text message of his entire life. He composes a note to Brett Harrington, his girlfriend and partner in adventure. The words are sparse but electric, with the high of survival. "Babe, I'm on the summit. What an incredible climb." It is a fleeting transmission of pure, unadulterated victory. The scene is almost hallucinatory. Sunlight drenches the glacier in gold, and the wind, usually a violent force capable of sweeping men into the void, has fallen completely silent. It is as if Alaska is offering them a divine truce, gifting them a day of absolute stillness. Ryan Johnson retrieves his camera to document the miracle sweeping the lens across the horizon to capture a panoramic video of their triumph. The footage immortalizes a world without end, a piercing blue sky, and the majestic shimmering crown of Mount Fairweather dominating the distance. Ryan is beaming. This is his backyard. His obsession, and a dream he has chased for years, is finally a reality. He looks physically shattered, but spiritually transcendent, wearing the expression of a man who has finally closed a book he has been writing for a decade. Mark, too, wastes no time in capturing the moment. He snaps a high-resolution photo of the vista and uploads it directly to Instagram. in seconds, a digital proof of their conquest, is hurtling through the atmosphere to servers around the globe, even as they balance on a precarious, terrifyingly small island of snow. Yet there is one final connection Marc feels compelled to make. He selects the photo and hits send on a message to his mother. Moments later, a screen lights up in a warm home far away. She opens the image and a massive weight lifts from her chest. She immediately types a loving response. The message flies back into the ether and the status updates to delivered. But tragically, that notification will sit on Marc's screen unread forever. That brief, pixelated exchange stands as the final lifeline connecting them to civilization. From this point on, Marc-André's phone will essentially become a black box, never transmitting another byte of data. However, summit. Euphoria is a dangerous drug, and seasoned mountaineers know the grim reality reaching the top is merely the halfway point, and statistically, the descent is where death waits. The hardest miles are still to come. They stow their phones, secure the camera gear, and shift their mental focus back to the ropes and anchors. The headline achievement is secured, and their story is technically written, but the book isn't closed. Now the mountain is ready to collect its toll. The price of admission to the summit is a harrowing, flawless return to the valley floor. They begin the technical preparations to repel blissfully ignorant that the pristine weather surrounding them is merely a facade, a stage curtain about to be violently ripped away. On the map, their route home looks like a simple subtraction problem. The plan is straightforward: down-climb the east ridge and drop into the feature known as the fourth couloir. But this is no casual stroll. It requires a complex series of technical rappels down steep, unforgiving terrain. The process is a rhythmic, monotonous dance, with death build and anchor slide down the rope, pull the line, and do it all over again. They face 5 or 6 repetitions of this sequence before they can even dream of the glacier's safety. In the high-stakes world of alpinism, this is viewed as the commute home, a victory lap after the heavy lifting. But thousands of feet below in the town of Juneau, the hands of the clock are spinning mercilessly forward. Their scheduled check-in is marked for March 7th, 2026. That is the deadline for Marc-André and Ryan to re-enter society, peel off their frozen boots, and sit down for a celebratory meal. Friends and family glance at their calendars, then check their screens with growing unease. The devices remain stubbornly dark. No incoming calls, no text tones, no new posts on the feed. The silence, initially dismissed as a minor delay or a dead battery, rapidly coagulates into a palpable dread. And then, as if timing its entrance for maximum cruelty, nature unleashes its fury. On March 7th, the exact day they were promised to return, the weather window slams shut with the force of a steel trapdoor. A catastrophic storm system swallows the entire mountain range. The sky, which had been an inviting azure just hours prior, collapses onto the earth in a suffocating white shroud. The wind screams with such ferocity that it rattles the windows of homes safely nestled in Juneau. High up on the peaks, the world has dissolved into chaos. Emergency rescue services are triggered, instantly moving to high alert status. Helicopter crews sit in their machines, fingers hovering over ignition switches, desperate to launch. But the storm is the dictator here. Flight is suicide. The visibility is absolute zero. To fly into that churning milk bowl would be a death sentence for the pilots. The rescue team is forced into a state of agonizing paralysis, knowing 2 men are out there in the white void, yet unable to move an inch to help them. The storm transforms a missing persons case into a worst-case scenario. The relentless snowfall isn't just delaying the rescue, it is actively rewriting the landscape. The snow acts like a massive eraser, burying tracks, filling in crevasses, and smoothing over any evidence that human beings were ever there. Slopes that were once solid have now turned into loaded guns, avalanche traps waiting for a trigger. Every passing minute slashes the odds of survival, yet the storm refuses to show mercy. For the loved ones waiting on the ground, the true torture begins, the suffocating, helpless wait for the mountain to clear its throat and reveal its secrets. Finally, the thrum of a helicopter engine cuts through the air, breaking the somber silence that has gripped Juneau for days. The second the clouds fracture enough to allow passage, the rescue team is airborne. Inside the bird, the atmosphere is tense and professional. There is no idle chatter. The pilots and spotters merge into a single focused organism of observation. Their eyes dissect every square meter of the blinding white canvas, desperate to find anything that violates the natural geometry of the ice and rock. They know the grim reality. They are likely no longer searching for survivors. They are hunting for anomalies, shadows, or colors that don't belong. As the helicopter sweeps near the base of the face, right where the journey started, they spot their first tragic clue, a pair of skis. The equipment is lying exactly where Marc and Ryan abandoned it before their ascent. Just meters away, an avalanche probe, topped with a high-visibility orange vest, protrudes from the snow, standing like a lonely flag on a ghost ship. The sight strikes the rescue team with more force than the gale. If the climbers had successfully descended, those skis would be gone. Finding them there means only one thing: they never made it back to the bottom. If everything had gone according to plan, they would have already radioed in and started the long trek back to civilization. But their gear remains exactly where they left it, a silent vigil for owners who never returned to claim it. This abandonment signifies only one terrifying possibility: Marc-André and Ryan are still out there somewhere in that high-altitude frozen maze. The rescue chopper throttles up, fighting the thin air as it traces the climber's likely descent path in reverse. The spotters are glued to the windows, scanning the brutal east ridge and the sheer drop of the fourth couloir. Suddenly, their gaze sharpens. They lock onto a minute, almost invisible anomaly perched right at the very pinnacle of the chute. It is a rappel anchor bolted securely into the stone and appearing completely untouched by the elements. This hardware is the smoking gun, a crucial fragment of evidence needed to reconstruct the timeline of this disaster. That solitary anchor serves as concrete proof. The pair made it this far. They stood right on that ledge. They had initiated their descent following the exact route they mapped out, and for a moment the plan was unfolding perfectly. They were heartbreakingly close to the bottom, just a few rope lengths separating them from salvation. The pilot drops the collective pitch, guiding the machine downward, tracing the ruthless logic of gravity that defines these peaks. They sweep toward the base of the couloir, where the vertical slope terminates into a massive glacial fracture known as a bergschrund. This is the volatile seam where the moving glacier tears away from the stagnant rock, creating a gaping abyssal throat. Right there, amidst the chaotic debris field of shattered ice and avalanche runout, a spotter catches a flash of unnatural color. From this altitude, the objects look insignificant, like stray threads discarded carelessly onto a pristine white bedsheet. The helicopter stabilizes into a hover, battling the downdraft to get a clearer picture. These aren't rocks or tricks of the light. They are unmistakable bright orange climbing ropes, standing out starkly against the monochrome landscape. But these lines aren't resting on the surface. They disappear deep into the dark belly of the crevasse, partially shrouded by wind-blown powder. A heavy, suffocating silence instantly fills the cabin as the crew realizes the implication. These are veteran rescuers, and they can read the snow like a forensic report. The ropes aren't coiled for storage. They are a violent, chaotic bird's nest. Their location deep in the fissure confirms they didn't arrive there through a controlled placement. They plummeted from the heights above, dragging the men attached to them into the darkness. In that split second of recognition, the mission status shifts tragically from a rescue operation to a recovery effort. The fragile hope that the boys might be huddled in a snow cave waiting out the storm evaporates faster than rime ice in the morning sun. Climbing ropes found inside a bergschrund are never a distress signal. They are a tombstone. They stand as a silent, grim testament that gravity ultimately claimed the victory. Where human vision fails in the shadows, technology must take over. The rescue team deploys a Reco detector to sweep the area. This handheld unit is designed to pick up harmonic radar frequencies bounced back by passive reflectors sewn into high-end mountaineering apparel. The pilot holds a steady hover directly over the gaping maw where the orange lines disappear. The operator aims the directional antenna straight down into the frozen throat of the bergschrund. Almost immediately, the device screams to life, emitting a piercing, rhythmic chirping sound that cuts through the rotor wash. The return signal is strong and coming from deep within the abyss. It is a sound that extinguishes the last flickering candle of doubt. The reflectors on the climbers' jackets are answering the call. They are down there buried beneath tons of snow. With the location tragically confirmed, the experts begin the forensic task of piecing together the disaster's mosaic. The state of the ropes tells the first chapter of the story. They are not stowed away or prepared for travel. Instead, the lines are pulled taut and hopelessly tangled. This points to one devastating conclusion: at the exact moment gravity took hold, Marc-André and Ryan were roped together as a single unit. In the vertical world, the rope is usually a symbol of life, a literal lifeline connecting partners. But in a catastrophic scenario, that same bond can turn into a suicide pact, irrevocably binding two fates to the same tragic ending. Without a bomb-proof anchor, if one climber peels off the wall, the physics are unforgiving. He drags his partner into the void with him. They went down as one team. But what exactly knocked them off the mountain? The recent storm has scrubbed the slope clean of tracks. However, Mountain Sense points to three likely scenarios, each one lethal. First, a cornice, a deceptive overhanging ledge of wind-hardened snow could have snapped off under their weight, removing the floor from beneath their feet. Second, a localized slab avalanche might have fractured above them, sweeping the slope and knocking them into the void like bowling pins. But there remains a third, perhaps more technical possibility. Anchor failure. The very point where their rope connected to the mountain could have ripped out of the crumbling rock under the shock load. The most gut-wrenching aspect of this tragedy, however, is simply when it occurred. It happened on the descent. The grim statistics of high-altitude mountaineering are unforgiving in this regard. The vast majority of fatal accidents occur after the summit has already been bagged and the climbing is technically over. The body is running on fumes, and the sharp adrenaline of the ascent is replaced by fatigue. The razor-edge focus begins to dull as the climber's mind drifts to thoughts of a hot shower and a warm meal. For just a split second, vigilance wavers. The geography of the fourth couloir acts as a massive natural funnel. Anything that detaches from the upper face, be it rock, ice, or human, is inevitably channeled straight down into the gaping mouth of the Bergschrund. A fall from that altitude into such an icy trap leaves mathematically zero chance for survival. We are talking about a plummet of hundreds of meters terminating in a catastrophic impact against the granite-hard bottom of the crevasse. The violence of the event happens in the blink of an eye. It is highly probable that consciousness was extinguished before the brain could even process the horror of what was taking place. Then the mountain finishes the job. The deluge of snow and ice that accompanied their fall, or broke loose shortly after, immediately buried them under a dense layer several meters deep. Their bodies are now entombed under tons of compressed white mass, turning the Bergschrund into a natural sarcophagus. Tragedy struck at their absolute peak, transforming the euphoria of their greatest triumph into the eternal frozen silence of the glacier. There comes a distinct moment in every operation where the heroism of a rescue mission crosses the invisible line into a suicide mission for the first responders. As the team in the helicopter peers down into that shadowed couloir where the ropes lie, the reality sets in. The mountain is not done. It is still primed and armed like a cocked gun, waiting for a trigger. The objective avalanche danger in this narrow throat remains critically high. The massive snowpack hanging precariously over the fall site is structurally unstable and ready to slide. Any attempt to winch rescuers down, or even the acoustic vibration from the rotor wash, could be the catalyst that sends thousands of tons of snow crashing down on top of them. The rescuers are desperate to go down. Their hearts and adrenaline scream at them to act, to do something, but their rational minds and their instruments scream, "Stop." The recovery operation is calculated to be statistically impossible without further loss of life. A heavy, suffocating gloom descends upon the search headquarters and the administrative offices. They are forced to admit the grim reality. Officials step forward to make the announcement that everyone dreaded but secretly knew was inevitable. Marc-André and Ryan are officially declared deceased. The last ember of hope is extinguished, leaving behind only the cold, unfeeling bureaucracy that accompanies death in the mountains. The burden now shifts to the grieving families. They are faced with making what is arguably the most horrific and impossible choice of their entire lives. They have the right to demand the search, continue to insist on recovering the bodies regardless of the cost. But they look at the unstable weather forecasts, they listen to the pilot's grim reports, and they understand the blood price of that decision. To continue working in the volatile environment of the couloir could mean adding fresh names to the list of victims. To bring back the dead, they would have to gamble with the lives of the living. In an act of profound grace, the families make a noble and incredibly difficult decision. They ask for the search to be suspended to ensure no rescuers are harmed. They choose to let their loved ones rest. And so the story concludes in the exact same geographical coordinate where just a few days prior, the team had achieved their ultimate alpinist triumph. This is the cruel, biting irony of high-altitude climbing. The cathedral of their greatest glory transforms into their final resting place. The Mendenhall Glacier claims them both, wrapping them in its frozen embrace forever. It claims Marc-André, the young visionary who didn't just climb. He danced on the rock faces. He was a man who sought not just a physical summit, but a spiritual fusion with the wild nature he loved so dearly. It claimed Ryan as well, the seasoned veteran, the devoted father, and the mentor, who knew every inch of that ridge like the back of his own hand. They came from two different worlds, yet their distinct destinies were bound together by a single length of rope, and now they rest side by side beneath the deep, unforgiving snows of Alaska. The entire climbing world was instantly plunged into a state of profound mourning. This was far more than just the tragic loss of two gifted athletes. It felt like a visceral gut punch to the global community that had been anxiously tracking every step of their historic ascent. Social media platforms, which had absolutely exploded with excitement over their summit photo just hours before, were suddenly transformed into a digital wake, flooded with endless black squares and heart-wrenching words of final farewell. The towering mountains that had given their lives ultimate purpose eventually became their final sanctuary, shrouding their bodies from the world and preserving them forever within the pristine, merciless purity of the eternal cold. Typically, when the frantic hum of the rescue helicopters fades into the distance and the search teams reluctantly return to base, empty-handed, a heavy, suffocating silence descends upon the landscape. However, in this instance, that oppressive silence was completely shattered by an overwhelming surge of human solidarity. Friends and strangers alike were struck by the realization that Ryan Johnson had left behind more than just legendary climbing routes. He had left behind a grieving family. The climbing fraternity is a unique, loosely connected global network, but in moments of profound grief, it tightens into an unbreakable knot of support, and people immediately sprang into action to help. A fundraising campaign was swiftly launched to support Ryan's 2-year-old son Milo. Donations poured in from virtually every corner of the planet, quickly amassing over $43,000 in support. While no amount of money could ever bring his father back, these funds created a vital safety net for a child who will grow up understanding that his dad was a true legend of these peaks. Meanwhile, the death of Leclerc sent a massive shockwave rippling through the entire community. As the initial shock began to subside, it gave way to a deep and profound reevaluation of values among climbers. The common assumption was that solo climbers perish due to foolish risks or unchecked ambition, but this tragedy defied that narrative. Marc was a different breed entirely. He was the absolute embodiment of calculated caution and supreme self-control, never taking a step he hadn't fully measured. If the mountains could swallow him whole, a visionary genius who could read complex ice formations like an open book, then truly no one was safe. This terrifying realization forced many of the world's top athletes to pause and seriously reconsider the ultimate price they pay for their passion. Yet the real wave of understanding wouldn't arrive until later. In 2021, the documentary film The Alpinist was released to the world. Cameras had been shadowing Marc during the final years of his life, perfectly capturing his infectious smile, his wild hair, and his unique philosophy. Not a single person on that film crew could have possibly imagined that they were actually filming a requiem for a life that was about to be cut tragically short. What was intended to be a vibrant portrait of a living genius transformed into his posthumous monument, and in doing so, the film achieved something truly incredible. It dragged his philosophy out of the small niche circle of professional climbers and into the bright light of the general public. Millions of viewers witnessed not a madman chasing death, but a free spirit desperately chasing the essence of life. They saw a young man who climbed not for cameras, sponsorship deals, or likes, but for that transcendent moment where the ego dissolves completely into the overwhelming grandeur of nature, making the film a powerful manifesto for freedom. Audiences walked out of theaters with tears streaming down their faces, absolutely stunned by the raw purity of his intentions. While far away in Alaska, the north face of the Mendenhall Towers stands as a silent witness. That very specific route, a delicate thread drawn across unforgiving ice and solid granite, remains their eternal monument, a line in the sky that no one can ever erase. It belongs to them and them alone. The story of Leclerc and Johnson has become a symbol of uncompromising passion, serving as a reminder that life is not measured by the number of breaths you take, but by the moments that completely take your breath away. They did not slowly fade away into old age or get lost in the mundane routine of existence. They left this world in the exact same manner in which they lived in it. They went out fast, burning bright, standing at the absolute pinnacle of their craft and doing the one thing they loved more than life itself.